Orbiting 250 miles above, the space station provides us with the ultimate view of planet Earth. From this perspective, we ask our guests to engage with 6 questions that orbit around wonder and stories of hopefulness. For the next few minutes, this is our Wonderspace.
Welcome to the 106th episode of the Wonderspace Podcast, which is an expression of a family trust called Panapa. My name is Steve Cole, and since September 2020, I have asked the same 6 questions to over 100 people from around the world. People like Tamsin Jones, who in episode 36 talked about her role in the Rallying Cry, a platform established to amplify the collective wisdom and creativity of women business leaders across Africa to inspire global change and drive real climate action. We're thrilled once again to be drawing from the wonder of Ask Nature, who look to nature for inspiration to solve design problems in a regenerative way. Here is another moment to help us re-wonder.
The same sunlight that makes it possible for us to see puts our sensitive retinas at risk of damage. So animals' eyes have evolved our own excellent sunscreen. It's a suite of chemicals called kynurenines that concentrate in the lenses of our eyes. As incoming photons of high-energy ultraviolet light hit a kynurenine molecule, they spark changes that cause different parts of the molecule to swell with negative electrical charge. This causes positively charged protons to ricochet like billiard balls through the kynurenine's spindly molecular structure. This dissipates the potentially harmful UV radiation into safe vibrational energy before it can hit and damage the DNA in our cells. Now, researchers are developing ways to use the performance of kynurenines to protect our skin without the harmful environmental impacts of most modern sunscreens.
This week on Wonderspace, we orbit with songwriter, musician and producer George Holliday. After converting an old library bus into a recording studio, George toured around Europe and ended up recording a 16-track album called Made on the Road, created in 60 different locations. Today, Made on the Road is a creative hub on wheels, producing music for TV, film and advertising. With this expansive overview of Earth, I start by asking George if we could do a fly past over any part of the world that is significant to you. Which place, city or country would it be and why?
Well, I wish we were that high up right now, looking back. I would be looking down towards Asia, I think, at this point, for 2 reasons. One, with what I do in music, and we'll get into that in a little bit, I've always had a love for world music. And when I was at university, I studied Turkish and Egyptian, but my big love was in Asian music, specifically Japanese and Indian influences, and then a little bit of African percussion immersed into it. But also my dad spent a lot of time in Singapore, and I know nothing about his life when he was out there, when he was younger. So I'd be looking down there, wondering what stories he was creating down there, and would love to go and explore. I've never been.
George, give us a glimpse into your life story so far, with an emphasis on what you are doing currently.
So I guess my earliest memory of George Holliday, as I know him in my head, I was always a creative kid. I was always outdoors. We didn't have the Xbox. We didn't have the games. We were out playing tag and inviting friends around, knocking on kids' doors, friends' doors, saying, "Is Jimmy coming out to play?" That was very much our childhood in a small village. And music was introduced when I was about 7. I was also playing tennis, so there was sort of 2 strands of me. And I had to make a choice when I was 16 on, is it going to be music? Is it going to be tennis? And by that point, I was already thinking about beer and girls. And of course, I went for the music out of the 2. So from that point, I kind of spent the next 8 years performing and playing. I got my first job as a piano player in a little bar down the road on a marina when I was like 15. Felt very lucky, 50 quid cash in hand every other week. And I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. Music, full time. And I've been very fortunate to always been making a living off music since. When I was on the road, played for some amazing people. The last sort of proper big gig, I was really lucky to play for a guy called AJ Brown, and we were supporting Lionel Richie. And I thought, do you know what? This is probably one of the last hurrahs I should do on performing live, because I wanted to move over to music production. So whilst I did that gig, I'd already had a studio bus I was building back at home. It was in production, so to speak, to make this bus that I was going to travel around in, produce music in this little studio. And I traveled around Europe 3 times in the next 4 years doing just that, meeting amazing people on the road, made great connections. That kind of became my business card. It's what I've been known for the sort of last 5 to 6 years, this guy in the bus producing music. I think the best part about having the bus, certainly the first memory that jumps to mind was we were traveling around meeting communities actually, and trying to work out what was going on in that community. I was obviously bringing music to the table and creating off the back of these stories. And I always thank the bus for these opportunities, because there was one moment I was sat under the stars in Spain, sat with 2 Syrian refugees who had obviously had a dreadful time, and they were then at that point settled in Berlin, but they'd come over to this community where they'd had a friend who had invited them out whilst we were there. And I remember being sat on this curbside, hearing these incredible stories from this guy, but also found out he was like a world-class musician, and he was just playing me very traditional Syrian music that I'd never really understood. I'd never had somebody properly explain it to me, both emotionally and the instruments that we used, how they're played, and it's very different to Western music as we know it here in the UK. So that was an amazing learning curve for me, and I do truly thank being on the road to have those opportunities, and you have those conversations. Of course, you are inspired beyond belief, but then you have the opportunity to collaborate with these people, and being open to those conversations is what it's all about. I think hitting the road and embracing those moments. And now I'm really enjoying making music for adverts. We've done a couple of TV series title sequences. And when I say we, I've got a great mixing engineer I work with in America and a great mastering engineer in Australia, so that we can be making music 24/7 and really being as creative as possible to hit these tight deadlines that is such a predominant part of working in the advert and film music scene. So I'm hoping that's going to be the next 5 years, 10 years, 2 decades, who knows?
Where on earth is your place of reset or recharge?
The first thing that came to mind was the airport. And I'm thinking, why is it the airport? And then I thought a bit deeper into it and realised, actually, it's the journey that makes me feel most recharged. And I think it's because when you're on a journey, you're forced into certain situations. And whether that's just going through security, whether that's finding your seat on a train, whether it's looking at Google Maps as to which direction you're walking, it doesn't matter, but you're forced into the present and the now. And there's nothing quite like it for me for a reset. And also just the excitement of wherever I'm heading. I really do get a kick out of traveling and being on the road, and the journey is the biggest part of that. And so, yeah, I think my answer is going to be something really boring, like a bus station or a train station. Just that point of no return where you are heading somewhere different.
What wonder of the natural world excites you the most?
The true natural wonder of the world to me is the sound. It's the resonance of Earth. And as I'm traveling, even just the basics of noise around you, whether you're in a forest or you're just engulfed in the soundscape of where you are, or it might be that right now where I'm sat, I can hear a road behind me and there's wind blowing in the trees in front. And that contrast of the two, the human interference. But somebody told me once that the Earth resonates at 7.83 hertz, which is a really low frequency. You can't really hear that as a human. Just somebody saying that made me start thinking, like, what do trees resonate at? what does what do leaves? What is that white noise? Where is that? And I think creatively, I just love silence or sitting with just the sound of nature. And I think that is a wonder of the earth in itself. We always think about what we're looking at, or where would we be, and what are those wonders of the world when you're stood below that waterfall. But my brain always goes, or my ears always go to the sounds around us, and how so many different species, how many different parts of nature come together to create a soundscape. And I think that's why I love sound in films and to picture, because you can synthetically create all of those things. So a bit of an abstract one, but I would say the frequency of Earth and the sounds that Earth create is probably the part of nature that excites me the most.
George, what is your story of hopefulness that's not your own, about a person, business or non-profit who are doing amazing things for the world?
There is a guy called Steve Simpson who I had the absolute pleasure of meeting in November last year. A really good friend of mine, Dave Erasmus, introduced us, and he was working with Steve on this project where Steve has gone to coral reefs around the world that are struggling, they're dying out. And what he's been experimenting with, him and his team, they've been recording sounds of healthy coral reefs and then playing them underwater back to unhealthy coral reefs. And then just studying, just watching, seeing what happens. And these unhealthy coral reefs are literally thriving with life again. They're coming back to life just from the sound of healthy coral reefs. And what he's doing, the next step on from that, is gathering all these sounds across the world in oceans of fish, of the coral growing, just even the sound of healthy underwater soundscapes, and then mashing them all together, actually mixing them together to almost create a world that's not real but sounds healthy. And he's just traveling around all these Great Barrier Reefs and trying to see what brings them back to life. First of all, I'd never heard of any project like it, and the tech is so simple. It's a little underwater microphone, very affordable. It's being played back through an underwater speaker that they use for synchronized swimming. So it's all very accessible gear. And I'm thinking, this is something in theory people could do themselves in their own areas. But not only that, it's giving people the opportunity to hear fish. I'd never heard fish before and actually listen to their conversations. And off the back of that, you realize how close species are to humans. So he was saying that fish on one side of the world, let's say a clownfish, will sound slightly different to a clownfish at another part of the world, almost like we have accents as humans. So it's quite in-depth what he's learning off the back of it when they think they've discovered a new fish, but no, it's just a Liverpudlian clownfish. But the fact that he's able to regenerate and bring back to life a world that has otherwise seems like we're not going to be able to save it. It's too far gone. What he's doing is absolutely incredible. And I hope that other people start experimenting with playing sound of healthy nature into dying woodlands, or who knows where that experiment will go. But it's very early days. Steve's very up for working with everybody and anybody, because his pure goal is for the benefit of nature and bringing it back to where it was before we started interfering. And I think if you're willing to put all of that on the line, all of your ego aside, to help the world, I just think that's an incredible project.
Finally, as we prepare to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, what insight, wisdom or question would you like to leave with us?
Yeah, I probably have one of each. I probably have an insight that leads into a question. When I was in the bus, part of my experiment was how can I make my life cheaper so that I don't have to be working as quite as hard, taking up space for creativity just to pay the bills, do all the basics that we need to do in society to keep moving. And it worked really well. My whole mindset was changed on, rather than trying to earn more, trying to work towards a promotion or, increase my wages, salary, etc. why don't we just go the opposite way, make things cheaper so there's less to pay for? And actually my rent was my fuel at the time. It was how far I wanted to go, then dictated how much I needed to have in the bank to be able to afford that. And since then, my mindset's changed yet again on, I'm very aware of it being a massive diesel bus, and it's now parked up and doesn't move because I don't want to be spending all those fumes, so to speak. So it's created a new headspace for me to just live and think. And as I'd be coming back into the atmosphere, I'd be thinking, what's the next stage of that? How can I make the world a better place through the skills that I have? Now, it feels like music isn't going to be strong enough to necessarily do that, other than writing music that emotionally moves people, or writing that music that goes to that film that talks about climate change and really connects the emotion to the listener. And those are all very good everyday things. But what I really like to think about is, how can I walk the opposite direction to the crowds? And if I was going to be doing that, and this is the question, what would I be looking for by walking the opposite way in the crowd? And 4 or 5 years ago, me walking the opposite direction looked like, how do I make my life cheaper rather than trying to earn more money? So that's like the example I'd like to use. But the question and I guess thought I'd love to leave the podcast with is, everybody listening, if you're going to walk the opposite direction to a crowd, not to be a rebel, but just to try and see what was in the other direction, what area of life what area of the world would you like to explore with that thought process?
You can find out more at madeontheroad.co.uk. In his story of hopefulness, George spoke about marine biologist Steve Simpson. And you'll find a link to Steve's TEDx talk on George's Wonderspace episode page. What is your story of hopefulness that's not your own, about a person, business or non-profit who are doing amazing things for the world? We would love you to consider recording yourself in under 30 seconds, sharing your story on your phone through your video or the voice recorder app. You can then simply upload the recording to the link on our website, ourwonder.space. I want to thank George for joining us on Wonderspace. Let's continue to share our stories of hopefulness that makes a name for someone else. We need them like never before. Thanks for listening.